Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining our May action call. We're going to get started in just a few moments, so please just hold tight. We're going to wait a little bit to see if some others join. And while you wait, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please feel free to use the chat feature and tell us a little bit about yourself, your name, where you're calling in from. All right, everybody. I think we're going to get things started. We're about 2 minutes in. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. We are so happy that you could join us. This is our third member action call. And believe it or not, the legislative session is almost behind us. This week marks the final days of the session. So we have a lot of movement to update you on regarding our legislative priorities. And we have a few opportunities for upcoming events and actions you can take. So we'll be letting you know about that in a little bit. Um, as for right now, though, who we are, my name is Liz Harwood. I use she, her pronouns. I've been with the organization for a little over 4 years now. And I am joined tonight by Jordan Hayden, one of my wonderful colleagues, as well as Ben Edgerly Walsh. So I'm going to pass it over to you first, Jordan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight and for having me. My name is Jordan Hayden. I use she, her pronouns, and I am VPIRG's Democracy Vermont campaign director. I have been with the organization for a little over 4 years now, and it's been great. And I'm happy to be at this event with you tonight. Unfortunately, my colleague Josh had to drop off last minute, so he is not able to attend tonight, but I will do my best to cover the portion that he was planning for this evening. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jordan. And Ben, are you available to introduce yourself? Ben Edgerly Walsh is our special guest this evening.
Yes, Ben, he, him. I've run VPIRG's Climate and Energy Program since 2012, and I'll be talking a little bit more about data centers and what we're trying to do about them today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. So glad you could be here with us and speak on this really important topic. And yeah, so for our guests, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to know who you are, what's bringing you to the call right now. And as spring is finally springing in Vermont, if you want to tell us like your favorite garden fruit, your veggie or flower this time of year, it'd be really fun. And yeah, for a quick overview on the work that we do, so VPIRG stands for the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. We are the largest nonprofit consumer protection and environmental advocacy organization in the state, but there's a lot more to us. We've been advocating for Vermonters since 1972, since our founding on the UVM campus. And specifically, we focus on four areas of engagement. So, public education, helping people understand what's happening in their local and state government and how they can get further involved. Grassroots engagement. I imagine most of you have been canvassed at one point or time. You received a knock on your door. You were greeted by a VPER canvasser talking about one of our key issues. That's how we really work to build our power. And then to complement that, we focus a lot in the State House with advocacy, getting our members and coalition partners in the State House utilizing our team of expert advocates and really helping legislators prepare and research the best possible bills. And also coalition building. So looking to bring organizations, nonprofits, businesses, communities, helping them advocate for the Vermont that we want to see. And policy-wise, we focus on 6 key areas this year of policy: climate and energy. So like working to advance equitable climate solutions that reduce pollution, that protect public health and ensure that we can live in this changing climate. Environmental health, keeping toxics out of our environment, tackling recycling issues. Consumer protection, mostly like data privacy regulations. The amount the general public knows about data privacy is limited, and we really want to expand that. Democracy, election access, people across Vermont being able to have their voices heard. And we have this year taken up 2 new policy areas: immigration and healthcare. And when it comes to immigration, we've done a lot in federal immigration efforts, currently surging, some would say, and a vast majority of immigration detainees are not receiving due process or representation when they're going through a traumatic legal procedure. So we really want to make sure people receive due process. And with healthcare, exploring affordability and accessibility and even consumer protection, especially as medical costs increase and insurance is becoming more and more complex. There's a lot of unequal access to care. So that's been awesome to take on. And at VPIRG, we are proudly independent, and everything we do is powered by our members. We answer to people, not profits. And our work, whether it's advocacy or research or education, it really only happens because of our members' support. And a big part of that is our sustaining members. They're the folks that are giving monthly and offer us that steady support that allows us to plan ahead and pivot when we have to. So just really want to emphasize and say thank you to all of you for your ongoing support and your engagement. I'm so glad that you could be here today. And yeah, so in May, we help to host or organize about 4 events and organizing software training for a slate of indivisible leaders across the state to advance their ability to communicate and organize in their communities. We helped promote and plan the St. Albans Ice Out rally. We were lucky enough to partner with Indivisible Callus also for a Contra Dance fundraiser that was in Montpelier. And we just put on a gubernatorial candidate forum in Colchester, and that saw about 175 people, both in person and virtually. So we certainly have been keeping ourselves busy. And yeah, so now we're going to dive into our policy updates. And as we head into the last few remaining days of the legislative session, I'd love to now turn it over to our Climate and Energy Director, Benadryl Walsh, to present on H727, as Ben has really been the lead advocate in the State House working to protect Vermonters from the dangers of developing data centers without regulation. So Ben, over to you.
Thank you so much. I would love to share my screen, and I think I can do that. It's just gonna jump in front of the other slide deck, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Um, all right, here we are. So before I dive in on data centers and H727 specifically, I just wanted to say it's fantastic to be here tonight with other VPIRG members. I'm both a staffer and a longtime monthly sustaining member of VPIRG. I've gotten canvassed many times over the years. Um, we haven't always done this kind of an update, and I'm so glad that Jordan and Josh and Liz have gotten this kind of rhythm going to give our members, all of you, an opportunity to hear a little bit more about our work on a kind of ongoing basis, because we would not be able to do any of this advocacy on any of the things you just heard about or any of the other organizing that we do, but for the power of our members. So it's great to be here tonight. Okay, so I'm going to give you sort of a distilled rapid fire version of a presentation, or like a version of a presentation that I've done to a couple of legislative committees. We can share afterwards, or maybe in the chat after I'm done talking, YouTube links to the times that I've given a sort of more thorough version of this to the Senate Natural Resources Committee and the House Energy Committee. And of course, the way testimony works in the legislature, you're sort of testifying to the bill in front of you, as well as your goals on the topic. And so what we've been saying about this has been evolving over time. And so, if you're really into this topic, it might be interesting to see how things have changed over the course of the legislative session, because this bill has gotten a lot better and a lot more expansive as the session has gone on. Okay, so I want to set the stage a little bit on data centers, and then I'm going to conclude with some of the really key concerns, not exhaustive by any stretch, but some of the key concerns that we were really aiming at addressing when we were advocating on this legislation this year. And then just some of the considerations that we had in mind when we were thinking about what our position was going to be on this bill and the provisions in it. And I also just want to be very clear that I was the lead in the legislature on the energy and climate portions of the bill. I was not remotely the lead in the areas that are not in my wheelhouse, which is to say toxics and water. We worked very closely with the Vermont Natural Resources Council and the Lake Champlain. Oh my God, we've been dealing with the Chamber of Commerce. And so I almost said them, but the Lake Champlain Committee on the water and toxics provisions. So I'm going to be focusing on the energy pieces here, although it's got really strong protections on those other spaces as well. The first thing to know about data centers is they are enormous. This is probably something you've heard, but I wanted to kind of ground us in a little bit of context around that. So the green bars here are a couple of examples of electricity usage in Vermont. The blue bars are examples of electricity usage of data centers. So just really quickly going through this, the bar all the way over on the left, that's the smallest data center that would be regulated by H727, the bill that is on the governor's desk. That is about 2% of all the electricity usage in the state of Vermont. The green bar in the middle, that's Vermont Electric Co-op. That's the second largest electric utility in the state of Vermont. And so that's all the electricity usage of all the customers in the utility territory for the second largest utility in the state. The next one over is 100 megawatt data center. That is what the Senate bill would have banned for 5 years in Vermont. And so you can see these two bars here, Vermont Electric Co-op, and then the one just to the left of it, 60 megawatt data center. That's the average projected size of a data center in a couple of years, in 2028. So the second largest electric utility in the state of Vermont is the same size as the average data center will be in just about a year and a half. And then the last two ones that I wanted to note are all the way on the right. The green bar, there is all the electricity usage in the state of Vermont in a year. The much larger blue bar is a data center that's being built by Meta, formerly Facebook, in Louisiana. And it is about 2.5 times the electric usage of everything in the state of Vermont at one site. And more recently, I've heard news of two data centers that are 3.5 and 4.5 times the size of that are being planned for other parts of the country. So the largest of those in Utah would use about 12 times the electricity of the entire state of Vermont at one location. So hard to wrap your head around just how big these things are. I'll be quicker on the other slides. This is a very rapidly evolving space. 10 years ago, a 30 megawatt data center, so about 3% of the electric usage in the state of Vermont, was considered a large data center. And as I just mentioned, in about a year and a half, the average data center being built in the US is going to be twice the size of what was considered a very large data center 10 years ago. In the aggregate, there's so many of these being built that they're also increasing electricity usage dramatically. We don't know exactly how fast, but it's very fast, and it's going to be a significant portion of the electric grid in the United States within the next 10 years or so. So our overall approach here is really based on the precautionary principle, which is a fancy way of saying better safe than sorry. And we're dealing with companies that have valuations in the literal trillions of dollars in some cases. And so no matter how good we think our laws are, and we heard a lot about how strong our laws are already when we were advocating for this, like sort of, don't worry about it, we got this, regulations are already in place. Our approach is redundant safeguards when we're talking about companies like this are really important to have. And that's what this bill brings. Three buckets or principles that we were working on here: protecting Vermont's ratepayers and our grid, keeping climate pollution as close to zero as possible, and other pollution as well, though again that was in other organizations' wheelhouse, and ensuring strong oversight. So the issues that we're solving for here, or trying to solve for: one, potential rate impacts. That's a fancy way of saying these things drive electric costs up for other ratepayers. That is less true in Vermont than it is in other places, but I think it would be a mistake to assume that it cannot happen in Vermont without this bill. An NRDC analysis found that in just under the next 10 years, data center development in the PJM, this is a regional electric market that you can see in front of you here, so only a small fraction of the total country, would be $163 billion borne by other ratepayers unless additional protections are put in place. So again, while costs in Vermont would be smaller, the possibility of really significant costs is there. Number two, backup generation is something we're seeing at a lot of these sites. This is a site in Memphis, Tennessee. Elon Musk's AI company has built a couple of these sites in Memphis, data centers, that is. And the way they powered them is they have brought in 18-wheelers with giant, basically jet engines, gas generators on the back of them, dozens of them, fired them up. These are supposed to be, emergency generators for large industrial sites, and they're using them 24/7 as their primary power source. That is creating massive air pollution. They've been sued successfully, and they are still continuing to add new generators. And this one site in Memphis would create, on an annual basis with those generators, 10% of the total NOx pollution in the entire state of Vermont, again, just from one site. So the local air pollution is significant, even not counting the climate pollution. Last couple of sort of key things that we've got in mind when we're working on this. The headroom on the grid, the sort of the extra space in Vermont's electric grid. So we've worked really hard, in particular by investing in Efficiency Vermont over the years, to reduce electric usage in Vermont relative to what it would be otherwise. And because of that, we actually have a little bit of extra space on our grid that we're not actually using, even in the middle of the summer when we're like really blasting AC, or in the middle of the winter when heating usage goes up. We've got a little extra space. And that's a great thing because we need that extra space for the electric vehicles and the heat pumps and the other electrification end uses that we are trying to bring online to reduce climate pollution. So if a data center comes here, uses up that extra space very quickly, then as we're building out more EVs, more heat pumps, we're going to need to build out our grid, and Vermonters could end up paying those costs absent additional regulation and protections. And so this bill is really aimed at reducing the increase in Vermont's peak usage and the increase in what the data center would be soaking up. And then lastly, obviously, climate pollution. There are a lot of words on this page. The point is, we haven't made a lot of progress on climate in this country, but we have made some really important progress. And data centers are using so much electricity. They are keeping coal plants online. They're bringing new gas plants online, and they are eating a significant chunk of the climate progress we've made in this country alive. And so if they potentially are coming here, we need to make sure that doesn't happen in Vermont. Ooh. So I know I've skipped over like exactly what this bill does, but the short version is it solves for these problems and other ones that I haven't gotten into. We can share a couple of blog posts that we've put up about this recently that really get into a little bit more of the minutia of exactly what the bill does, but very briefly, it bans on-site combustion generation for anything other than true emergency generation. It requires on-site renewables. It requires them to fund efforts that would reduce carbon pollution and reduce energy bills in Vermont. And it requires that they only get a contract for power in the state of Vermont if it ensures that other Vermonters are not bearing any of the costs for the transmission, distribution, electricity generation, or capacity that these data centers need. And that is something that is not in place in most other parts of the country and would really insulate Vermonters from the kind of rate impacts we're seeing elsewhere. Um, so just a couple of minutes on the sort of considerations. And this is one thing that you won't see in the testimony I've given, because this is sort of our behind the scenes thinking about where we landed on this bill, why we supported a regulation bill. I think arguably the strongest regulations on data centers from a ratepayer standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, and from a climate standpoint in the country. This bill doesn't have everything that we asked for. It doesn't have every potential provision you could have to protect Vermont in those ways, but it has a better assembly of them than I believe any other bill that has been passed in the country. And it does have some groundbreaking provisions in it, like the ban on on-site combustion that I mentioned, requirement for support of virtual power plants, and some other things. So the considerations we have: one, the risks are enormous. I'm not going to belabor that point. You get it. Two, we believed going in, and this is just a judgment call based on our best understanding of how the governor operates, there was a high likelihood of a veto if the state passed a moratorium. There was obviously a moratorium introduced in the Senate. The stated rationale for the moratorium was to give the state some time to develop regulations. We believe this bill represents not a perfect solution, but a very robust set of regulations that we can continue to build on. But it gets us to a good place if one comes to town soon. And if a veto happened with a moratorium, we would have nothing in place other than current law. Three, we always have our eye on what the impact might be of laws that we're advocating for outside of the state of Vermont. Obviously, whether a bill is in the best interest of Vermonters is priority number one, and a litmus test that no matter how good it might be for anyone else, we will never break. We will never advocate for something that's bad for Vermont, but good for other places or good for the globe. But when we can, we want to advance policies that are really good for Vermonters and have potential ripple effects elsewhere. And very strong regulatory bill seems to us to be more likely to be emulated elsewhere than a moratorium or a ban. The last few things that I'll mention, obviously, and this is something that I think you can have very, very reasonable argument against, but there is a reality that these things are being built. And if they're not being built in somewhere that has a strong regulations to minimize their impacts, we know where they're probably going to get built. They're probably going to get built in places with people of color, in places with a lot of people who are lower income, and there are real environmental justice costs to having places that have the power to say no simply saying no, and the places that can't say no getting stuck with all the downsides. So I think a ban or a moratorium is an entirely reasonable position to take, but that was part of why we landed where we landed. I won't get into these other ones, but there are a lot of other arguments that I think have some merit that have been thrown out in the legislative debate, either in the hallways of the State House or in testimony And they were things that we considered as we were developing our position on this. But those first four that I talked about were really our top priorities as we were considering how to develop our position on this bill and the provisions in it. And I'm happy to stick around if there are questions later, but I know we've got a lot to cover, so I don't want to turn this webinar into a data center webinar.
Thank you so much, Ben. There is one question in the chat. I wonder if you can see and address. Happy to read it too, if that'd be
Oh,
helpful.
yeah, no, I see it there. Yeah, this is a question we've been getting a lot. There was a very preliminary discussion. There were preliminary discussions in St. Albans about the possibility of siting a data center there. The Digger reported on data center owner deciding not to because the cost to interconnect at that location they were looking at was too high. Um, I will say there are places in Vermont that probably wouldn't cost as much to connect to the electric grid, that is, as that site. And so if that was the barrier, it's certainly possible that you could see a data center developer coming somewhere else, not seeing quite as high a price tag for that, and deciding to move forward. The imminent development of a specific site was not really the motivation behind this bill or our support of it. It's really more that this development is happening so fast in so many places. Public opinion is changing very quickly on it, and really souring in places where they've seen a lot of development and not really and have not had regulation. There are a number of states that have had tax incentives in place to develop these very light regulation, and as a result have just seen a ton of them built, and their power bills really go up and local impacts happen. So the concern really is less any one development and more we could see development here as power prices go up elsewhere, start to catch up to New England's. Vermont's low for New England. So if you're looking in this part of the country, you might look towards Vermont. And then at the same time, see regulations tightened up in other places that have historically seen more development. So if you look over like a 5 to 10 year time horizon, it's pretty reasonable to suggest that there's a decent chance that one of these are going to be at least proposed here. Actually, can I just one last thing? We can drop this in the chat.
Yeah.
If you have not gotten in touch with the governor, please get in touch with the governor. His Department of Public Service opposes this bill because of the requirement that they pay for carbon pollution reducing efforts. And we've also seen Americans for Prosperity come to town and oppose the bill. So it is not at all a guarantee that he lets this become law. He may well veto it. He's been very trigger happy with his vetoes in the climate space in the past. So I'll drop that in the chat, and please do call him, ask your friends and neighbors to call him. He definitely needs to be hearing from Vermonters.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ben. I'm going to transition over to Jordan now to do some of our policy updates.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Ben. Yes, just reiterating, echoing what Ben just shared, please reach out to the governor. We do have a call to action section that I will be going over a little bit later, so if you need a reminder, I'll be following back up on that. But yes, please do reach out. It's a crucial time, as you're about to hear, and there is still a whole lot happening here in the State House, so I am going to do my best to keep it all very brief and interesting for you all. But I do want to start by continuing the conversation on climate since we're already talking about it. And just again, big shout out to Ben for really taking the lead on all of this good work that you're seeing on this slide and that you're going to hear me give an overview on. So starting with S202, which is an act relating to balcony, portable, and plug-in solar. It has now passed both the House and the Senate as of today, and so that means it will be headed to the governor's desk pretty soon. This is possibly the most bipartisan bill that we've seen in the legislature in quite some time, so we're really proud to be working on that effort here in the state of Vermont. Moving on to H600, this bill was actually adopted into S202, funny enough. We are actually really excited about this development as we sought to strengthen our appliance efficiency standards here in the state to match the standards pushed by the Biden administration, which were, of course, subsequently cut by the current Trump administration. So, really important work happening here. This would ensure that household appliances sold in Vermont are still working towards reducing our emissions and our costs. Now, H740, this bill would require the creation of a greenhouse gas inventory and registry from all producers of emissions, including fuel suppliers. So, this bill actually just returned from a committee of conference, and we are not totally sure that the governor would support it in its current state, if at all. So, we will keep you posted and let you know as we receive more information there. Moving on to democracy, we've got S298, the Vermont Voter Protection Act, which seeks to protect voting habits of Vermonters and ensure that we are all able to show up at the polls or vote by mail, and to do so without any fear or intimidation involved. So we do hope that this act will be followed next session by a strong Vermont Voting Rights Act in lieu of the Supreme Court striking down the last pillars of the Federal Voting Rights Act in recent weeks. So definitely more work to do there, but we're not giving up. We're going to keep pushing forward. And then we've also got H686, the Lobbying Advertising Transparency Bill, which seeks to close a loophole that allows lobbying firms or PACs to only disclose a portion of the money that they spend on influential advertisements and mailers to essentially influence elections. So we've seen this already with Americans for Prosperity, which is a Koch brothers funded PAC. They've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in the last campaign cycle to really hurt legislators, specifically legislators who were focused on climate legislation. And all of this effort, they've only disclosed as little as 20% of the true amount that they spent on the lobbying campaign. So, again, really just focusing on that element right there. It's really important that we make this as clear and transparent to voters as possible. All right, moving on to data privacy on H211. So the Delete Act, unfortunately, has not been super successful in getting out of the Senate Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. While we are feeling a bit frustrated that data privacy continues to see such little attention in Montpelier, we will continue to double down our efforts to protect the private data of Vermonters. We've also got S71, and the update there is that the House passed a rather worrying data privacy bill last night. It will likely be on the way to the governor's desk pretty soon. And just to give you a taste of what we're up against here, this is what our consumer protection advocate, Zach Tominelli, had to say about the bill. We nearly enacted what would have been the strongest data privacy law in the nation in 2024, only to have the governor veto that bill. This session, we had hoped that Vermont would move forward with legislation that, while weaker than the 2024 bill, would still provide meaningful protections for consumer data. At the same time, we knew that big tech lobby and allied business associations would be advocating for Vermont to adopt a weak consumer data privacy model that allows companies to continue collecting whatever consumer data they want and to continue to do whatever they want with that data, so long as they disclose it in a privacy policy. So you can probably guess what happened. Unfortunately, last night, the House passed a version of the bill that tracks very closely with the tech industry's preferred model. So more work to be done there, certainly. But on to some better news in the environmental health space. As of yesterday, two major environmental health bills have been signed into law, the paraquat ban, which is H739, and the baby food safety bill, H536, which means Vermont has now become a national leader in reducing exposure to highly toxic pesticides and regulating toxic heavy metals in baby foods. Why did that exist to begin with? I'm not sure, but it did, and I'm glad that we're getting rid of it. So we are eternally grateful to the community members, partners, and legislative allies who advocated heavily for these important pieces of legislation. I will also mention that the Extended Producer Responsibility Program for Beverage Containers Bill, it's a mouthful, that's H915, which would provide some important updates to the state's popular bottle bill program, is continuing to move through the legislature as well, despite some intense opposition from major beverage manufacturers like Coke and Pepsi. So this bill would keep more redemption centers in business and create new opportunities for people to conveniently redeem containers. So both the House and Senate have passed this bill, and if the House accepts the Senate's newly proposed amendment, then the bill will be heading to the governor's desk as well. So some big updates there. Now, moving on to healthcare, we've got the prescription drug discount card bill, H577, and that is nearing final legislative approval with lots of support from both the House and the Senate. So, once launched by the Office of the State Treasurer, all Vermonters can access a free Array RX prescription discount card, which offers low prices on many prescription medications. You can sign up with the Treasurer's office to be notified when the card becomes available, and we can keep you updated on that process as well. We are also supporting work on the broader efforts towards universal publicly funded primary care, monitoring legislation addressing private equity ownership of Vermont's healthcare institutions, and initiatives to curb the skyrocketing costs of healthcare in Vermont, something I think that we could all appreciate in this moment. All right, and moving on to one last big program update here. As you can see, there is a lot going on the immigration front. You may have heard that the Constitutional Accountability Act has been passed into law, which means that now anyone can bring a local, state, or federal agent to court if they have violated that individual's constitutional rights. This really serves as a huge win as we think back to the unnecessary violence that unfolded on March 11th in South Burlington. The Sensitive Locations Bill, S209, which would prohibit civil arrests in healthcare facilities, community shelters, schools, places of worship, polling places, and government buildings, is now on its way to the governor's desk, along with the Immigration Protocols in Schools Bill, S227, which aims to secure the right of every child to equal access to a free public education and to a school that is safe from intimidation and fear, regardless of immigration status. So, collecting, requesting, or disclosing student information about citizenship, immigration status, place of birth, or nationality would be prohibited. And then we've got S208, the Law Enforcement Identification Bill, also sometimes known as the Bill to Unmask ICE. That is still working its way through the legislative process. While both the Senate and House sides have passed the bill, there have been substantial changes made in the House Committee on Judiciary. So a conference committee is in the process of being formed, comprised of 3 members of the House and 3 of the Senate. So they will need to work together and come to an agreement on final bill language if we want to see passage of S208. So we will keep you posted on that process. We're learning it all in these very recent moments, so more to come there certainly. And the last thing I'll mention here, as we wrap up on the legislative session, all eyes are moving towards the budget. So right now we're advocating for continued support for Vermont legal aid funding, both for immigration legal representation and intake processing through the legal aids hotline, which actually brings us to our first call to action for this evening. Drum roll, please. Here we are. So while the Budget Conference Committee considers what to fund in a very tight fiscal spending session, we hope you will reach out to share your support for Vermont legal aid funding. I will share a link in the chat for an action page that makes it super easy. If you're not sure if your legislators sit on that committee, this form will let you know one way or the other. And then again, on the climate front, please, please, please call the governor and tell him to sign the data center accountability bill. I will share his phone number in the chat so you can give him a call. And I also want to mention, in case you didn't know, it's an election year and we will need all hands on deck to get out the vote this November. We are hosting a free virtual training this summer, which you will hear more about in just a few slides. And then finally, I do hope you will register for an upcoming event or two with us, which I can tell you more about. Okay, I'm also just going to take this moment here to share those calls to action in the chat so you have them. Okay, and now we can talk about upcoming events. So on June 2nd, we have a Democratic Lieutenant Governor candidate forum happening at the Next Stage Arts Center in Putney. That event will feature Molly Gray, Esther Charleston, and Ryan McLaren. It is not to be missed. They had a great candidate forum back in Rutland not too long ago. So if you're in the Putney area, feel free to check it out or share with some friends. We also have a protest book talk coming up on June 5th. This is an evening with the authors. It's a really exciting new book called Protest, Respect It, Defend It, and Use It. I actually have already purchased my copy, so working through that right now. Really excited for that conversation. And then in tandem with that, there's also going to be a resistance skills and strategy training happening the day after in Burlington. This is all being done in partnership with Groundswell Labs, Freedom Trainers, Ben& Jerry's, Patagonia, and VPIRG. So really excited to be a part of that. Hope you can make it if you are in the area. And then finally, we've got two more Democratic gubernatorial candidate forums happening on the 15th and 17th of June. So you heard Liz, she mentioned that we had a really great event last night with those candidates, Amanda Janu and Allie Richards. So we've got a few more opportunities if you weren't able to make it to that. So there's a lot of information here. I will be sure to follow up via email with the links to these events and a few others, as well as the calls to action in case you're not keeping up with the chat. So a lot of information here. Don't worry, we will be following up with a follow-up email. So rest assured you'll have everything that you need. And Liz, I do want to pass it over to you to cover another really awesome upcoming opportunity.
Cool. Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, it's an election year and voter outreach matters more than ever. So we'd really love for you to join us on August 18th at 6 p.m. It's a virtual Get Out the Vote training. You'll learn how to canvass all the essentials, voter engagement strategies, and then key election information ahead of the election season. And this event will be held after Vermont's August 11th primary. So this training will prepare volunteers to confidently knock on doors and help strengthen civic participation across Vermont. So if you're ready to make a difference this election season, you really should join us. And yeah, thank you all so much for joining us tonight for our May action call. If you're interested in following up with any of us on anything, our contact information is here. We really hope to hear from you, and we really look forward to providing you with another update next month. So please tell your friends, join us again, and hope you guys all have a really great evening. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.